Hello everybody, my name's Dave. Thanks for joining on the channel and welcome. Tonight we're going to talk about 2-inch lifts on your car. So doing a 2-inch lift, I'm going to read from the screen again. I do apologise, but I'm not going to always be looking at the camera. So doing a 2-inch lift, a 2-inch lift is a suspension lift. And what does that give us? Well, it gives us the suspension lift, gives you more ground clearance and it allows you to fit bigger wheels. Cons: cost, affects suspension geometry, speedometer becomes inaccurate, vehicle is higher than to access, so your grandma's not going to be able to get in if you've lifted it up a couple of inches. Bigger wheels mean harder to stop, centre of gravity is raised, suspension may get wallowy. Let me just run through these. So the cost, you've got the cost of the suspension lift, so your components, so you may be replacing 4 shock absorbers, you'll be replacing 2 springs, and you've got the cost of readjusting your caster and your camber of your wheels if they are affected by your lift. Your speedometer becomes inaccurate. Mine, I'll go through this in a little bit. Vehicle is higher to access. Now you might think that 2 inches isn't a lot, but I know that my mother-in-law or my kid's grandma used to get in my car okay, and now she struggles. Bigger wheels mean harder to stop, so you've got more turning momentum on a bigger wheel, way more. You might want to upgrade your brakes a little bit. I upgraded mine, I put new rotors on and bigger pads, just to make it a bit better to stop. Although my wheels are only 32 inch, I've only gone up 3 inch. Centre of gravity is raised. So when you raise your car up, you raise your centre of gravity. If you put rooftop tents and heavy roof tacks on, you can end up with your car rolling over if you're not careful. And the last one, your suspension may get wallowy. Now that happened to my car. The suspension got really wallowy, and it was, Rob told me, he said he noticed it when he was following me. And he said that the car is tipping over quite a long way. So I replaced the shock absorbers for that reason. We're lucky with the Jackaroo because the car comes with torsion bar suspension on the front and springs on the rear. And why is this lucky? Well, in a nutshell, the front is adjustable and the rear we just need 2 bigger springs instead of 4. Let me explain. The front suspension on Jackaroo is torsion bar and shock absorbers. And for those of you misinformed people, shockers have no effect on suspension height. The purpose of the shock absorber is to keep your wheel on the ground while absorbing the pressure of the spring rebound, or in this case the torsion bar. The shock absorber stops the wheel being slammed to the ground by the springs. And it also stops you bouncing up and down on the springs as well. People will comment and argue that the shock absorber has an effect on ride height. It does not. End of story. The ride height of the vehicle is done by the springs only. If you want to argue the point, read this first, taken from Monroe, a well-known manufacturer of shock absorbers, from their website. I'll link it in the description. Their point is, despite popular belief, shock absorbers do not support the weight of the vehicle. If you want to dispute my point, go online and argue with Monroe first, and then come and argue with me. What is a torsion bar? A torsion bar is a long spring steel rod with one end held rigidly in the frame and the other end twisted by a lever connected to the axle. It is a flexible spring that resists twisting and has a strong tendency to return to its original position when twisted. Here's a picture. The front end. It is absolutely no use lifting the front of your vehicle if you're going to fit a bull bar and winch in the near future. Fit them first, then do the vehicle lift, or you'll be lifting the front twice. This would be a problem, and here's why. You adjust the torsion bars and fit the 90 kilogram plus bull bar and winch. The front will sag down again, you'll need to do the lift again. Now that doesn't sound like much, except you're going to have to go and pay your local tyre people to do your wheel alignment again, etc, etc. You know where I'm coming from. So do it first, do it right. Lifting the car. Right, first thing to do is to fit new longer springs in the rear. This is just a case, thanks to the Jackaroo and thanks to Isuzu, this is just a case of replacing the springs, and it's fairly easy to do because the springs and shock absorbers are separate. Note, I have replaced my shock absorbers with foam cell type shock absorbers which help with the increased roll of the car. I'll explain a little bit more about those in a minute. Next, measure the wheel from the center of the wheel to the bottom of the wheel arch above the wheel on both sides of the car. They should match. We now need to match this with the front suspension, and to do that we need to first change our shock absorbers, if you're doing that. And then measure the front arches to the wheel center. If the front still requires lifting, adjust the torsion bars at the height control arm on the picture I'm about to show you. Once you have achieved the same height on both sides, front and rear on both sides, the car is now being lifted and leveled. Immediately take your car to have the suspension and steering geometry checked at your local tyre shop. Lifting the steering can also alter the camber of the wheels, and they may require to be shimmed. Ensure that the tyre shop can adjust the camber, and ensure you get a printout of the wheel geometry readings when they're done. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about shock absorbers. There are several types of suspension shock absorbers available, and choosing the right one is important. Spending thousands on airbag suspension is not likely necessary, but choosing the correct shock absorbers is important after a lift has been applied. Now, there are quite a number of different types of shock absorber, but I'm only going to concentrate on two. The type that are fitted to your car, which are nitrogen shock absorbers, and I'm going to concentrate on twin tube shock absorbers and twin tube shocks. Okay, now I'll explain the difference between them in a minute. So my car was wallowing after I raised it, so I removed the nitrogen filled shockers and opted for Tough Dog foam cell shockers instead. The difference is to do with the oil filled shock absorbers foaming under use. Nitrogen is supposed to stop the oil inside your shock absorber from foaming, but they can foam and stop working well. So nitrogen shock absorbers are called twin tube shock absorbers, nitrogen charged. Okay, now I'm going to read this to you. It's a bit boring, but I'll read it to you. So twin tube shocks, nitrogen charged. Twin tube shocks utilize an inner and outer tube which separates the oil and gas inside the damper. The smaller diameter inner tube houses the piston shaft assembly, base valve and oil. The outer tube contains both nitrogen and gas and hydraulic shock oil. When a twin tube shock is gas charged, the purpose is to minimize aeration of the hydraulic fluid. This occurs when the shock is working hard and heating up. The nitrogen gas pressure compresses the bubbles and the hydraulic fluid, which prevents the oil and air mixing foam. Without aeration, the shock is able to function more efficiently and reliably. Nitrogen gas twin tubes. These shocks are great for general purpose driving, one who sees a lot of paved highways and roads with the occasional off-road excursion on the weekends. So, as opposed to those, are twin tube shocks, foam cell. A foam cell shock uses a compact foam sleeve inside the twin tube body, instead of taking the place of the nitrogen gas charge. The foam cell is more compact than nitrogen gas in terms of volume, leaving more room for the hydraulic shock oil, which is the main cooling agent of the shock absorber. Many foam cell shocks are developed from high heat environments, as they typically do better than nitrogen gas charged shocks in resisting fade through heavy use. Now here's a couple of myths. Myth 1. Once overheated and aerated, foam cell shocks don't return to normal. Not true. The foam cells may lose function over a very long term, but it's not due to acute overheating from any one instance. Foam disintegrates over time. Not true. For decent shock absorbers, decent quality. If you're buying no-name parts from an online auction site, then you might have that problem. The difference in ride quality between a nitrogen gas or a foam cell shock is determined solely by heart valving, in which case both shock designs can be tuned to feel near identical to the same vehicle. Do not be misled by thinking one is firmer or softer than the other, which comes down to completely valving of the shock. Irrespective of being natural gas or foam cell, the foam shocks are proven to take longer to overheat and reach a level where shock fade occurs. Typically hotter than any driver will ever get them, 200 or 300 degrees. So I had this argument with Rob, and I said that the foam cells wouldn't really make that much difference, and it would be the springs that I would need to stiffen up to get a less wallowy ride. He didn't agree, so I wanted the shock absorbers, and they are not as wallowy, I have to say, but they still can be a bit soft. Anyway, ready to hit the road. Now you've done your lift and you've had your wheels checked and everything. Here's a word of warning. Once your bigger wheels are on and you have had your suspension geometry checked, you'll be ready to hit the road. However, fitting bigger wheels will affect your speedometer accuracy. A rule of thumb is that the bigger the wheels, the further out the reading will be. I installed a HUD and the GPS speed display on my VMS. I sync the two together and then check them on an overhead gantry. My speedometer reads about 100 kilometers an hour at 108 kilometers an hour, which is out by enough to get a large speeding fine. Thanks for joining me. I'll see you on the next video.